A back alley encounter in Russia. Last night I had possibly the legit creepiest encounter of my life. Bar a few happenings in the dead of night in rural England. It involves a back alley and a very strange Russian man. A little about myself. I am 18 years old, living in St. Petersburg and stand at about 6'2". However, I am slim, at about 155 pounds. So not terrifying, but not a natural victim. My Russian is decent, but local speaking quickly is still a little difficult to understand. Now, 2 nights ago, I was going out to the nearest pub for a drink, and getting there involves going through an alley shaped like two L's, such that there is a point in the middle at which you cannot be seen from either road. When I reach this point, I decide to stop for a smoke before getting to the pub. I've been through this alley several times, and it is always very quiet. A man comes the other way, approaches me, and asks for a light. I offer it to him, and he begins smoking. I naturally expect him to move off, but instead he just stands there opposite me smoking. I assume he just wants smoking company, so I think nothing of it really. I will do my best to describe this guy, probably around 25 years old. He stood perhaps 5'10", but much burlier than me. His longish hair and patchy stubble sent me a weird vibe almost immediately that I did not trust. He wore heavy leather clothing, common, but the weirdest fucking thing was by far his boots. They had fucking spurs on them, so all in all, I'm getting the feeling that this guy is an eccentric, but that doesn't automatically mean anything, right? I noticed after about 10 seconds of silence that this guy isn't actually smoking. He's not inhaling the smoke at all. It occurs to me that he had trouble lighting the thing in the first place. Again, really fucking weird, but I rationalize it and assume he must be a relatively new smoker. He strikes up conversation. Now, I will do my best to write a transcript here, as an English speaker would say these things, but he spoke very, very, very strange. Something like this. "You're cool, man. We should hang out, man. I've got a cool bunch of friends I chill with. We play games and shit. You'd have fun." It strikes me as a weird opener, and I'm noping the fuck out at this point. All these weird vibes are combining into a feeling that this guy is a bit of a creeper. I reply courteously, "Sorry mate, got plans." This is a lie, but out of habit, to make my refusal seem more valid. He continues, "No, really dude, you should come hang out. We have a lot of fun, yeah." The repetition of the last bit 3 times, a lot of fun, sent shivers down my spine. And it is the bit brief of interchange that I really remember. He's leaning now, looking directly at me. I'm creeped, and resolved to get the fuck out of there. It occurs to me that because of the way he approached, he is between me and the main alley. I make to move around him, but he lifts the fucking cigarette butt, as if to burn me with it. I said to question him, "Yo, what the fuck, man?" Shit gets to a whole other level here. He starts speaking super fucking quickly, far too fast for me. I pick up a few things, stuff about his friends, and a lot of swearing at me. He finished his rant with his fucking statement, "Are you a homophobe? We like to eat homophobes." He said eat. No, not kill. Eat. How the hell did this escalate to here? I don't know whether I'm going to be raped or roasted at this point. I've had enough, though. He started towards me, but I shoved him hard in the chest out of the way and booked it down the alley and out into the road. I think he followed most of the way. But when I looked back, he was walking the other direction with his head low. I was jittery as fuck for hours. And when I talked to the barman, he said that this is kind of a weird area. A lot of gay people and a lot of gay haters. Nasty kettlefish. This guy fucking terrified me. He singled me out in an alley pretending to smoke in order to talk to me, tried to invite me to something, gangbang with his friends, tried burning me with a cigarette butt, and then when I refused, he threatened to eat me instead. In another thread, someone said I should post the stories of rural England, actually Wales to be exact. So if I have time tonight, I will post those stories. Evil stranger lurking in an alley, let's not meet. A few things first to get the basics out of the way. Long-time lurker, first-time poster. On mobile nonetheless, so sorry for formatting, grammar, etc. I haven't been sitting around thinking, oh, what could I tell? This movement has stuck with me since it happened. I just don't know how to explain it, so bear with me. Lastly, I've read the rules, so I hope it fits here. Now on to the story. I started leasing a condo in 2010 and lived there for roughly 4 years. To understand the story, I have to explain the location and layout of my condo. First and foremost, in the area I was in, my condo was considered a carriage house, back house. Basically what that means is, My unit was detached from all other units within the small condominium complex. My unit also sat above the complex's water heater and very small laundry facility. Therefore, I was on the second floor. In short, my condo was basically comparable to living in a very small house. That is on a second floor, so I had no one above me, beside me, or below me. It was a freestanding unit, and if I wanted to visit my neighbors' units, I had to walk down my stairs and go through a gate. My condo was only accessible through the alley, meaning that you couldn't even get to or inside my unit without being in the alley. The alley is where all the tenants face north on my street park, and all the tenants facing south on the street behind us parked. So, my unit had one singular set of stairs, which led straight up to a small, little landing or far balcony, and then, of course, the entrance to my unit. There was only one singular entrance and exit, and no additional balconies. My unit had a wooden door with a bottom lock and deadbolt, as well as a screen door that also had a lock as well. The screen door was total shit, because even if the screen door was locked, you could still open the screen door if you pulled hard enough. Alright, now that we have that out of the way, I've been living in this condo for about 2 years when this occurred, and never experienced anything remotely similar prior to or after the event. One night, I go outside of my little landing to smoke a cigarette. I know, blah blah blah, bad for me. I've since quit, so no comments please. It's nighttime, therefore it's dark outside, but our alley is pretty lit up, so I can see everything pretty well. I'm screwing around on my phone leaning over the railing, and I look down into the alley. I see this youngish guy walking down the alley near my unit, no big deal. Occasionally, there would be random people that walked in our alley from the bus stop, but they never just stopped and stared, they continued on, and I'd never feel threatened or concerned, as I lived in a pretty prestigious area. However, this guy stops abruptly and just stares at me. I mean, the dude literally just stopped dead in his tracks, doesn't say a word, and just stares up at me. At this point, we are making eye contact. I can't explain why or how I felt the way I did, but when he made eye contact, and to this day, I never felt the same emotions that came over me, but I could just sense he was evil, and no less than 10 feet away. His eyes had zero emotions. It looked as if he was staring at me like a lion would its prey before they kill. I'd never seen this man or interacted with this man in my whole entire life, and again, just to reiterate, I don't know why, I don't know how, but my body and mind just knew he was evil. After making eye contact, my heart beated rapidly. So I put out my cigarette and went inside. I didn't want to make it seem extremely obvious because, well, I didn't know his intentions. I locked my screen door, locked my big wooden door, and called one of my neighbors to see if he could go check what this dude was doing. My neighbor answers but says, "I'm not home right now, but I'll be pulling down the alley in a couple minutes, so I can see if he's still there." At this point, I'm standing in my kitchen, which is about 20 feet from the door, and I start to hear footsteps on my stairs, and then hear my screen door attempt to be opened. I know it's him. I wasn't expecting anyone that evening. I soon found out when shit goes down and fight or flight is about to kick in, I apparently freeze. No grabbing a knife for me, so needless to say, if anything happens in the future, I'm fucking screwed. At this point, I don't know how long it's been from a time standpoint, but honestly, time does stand still when you're in fear. All I know is this man has gotten my screen door open, and who knows what's next. As I'm preparing for the worst, I can hear Savior Neighbor screaming, "What are you doing?" The man, according to Savior Neighbor, flew down the stairs and booked it through the alley. Savior Neighbor tried to catch up, but Savior Neighbor was a bit older. I don't know what he was going to do or what could have happened that evening had my neighbor not come home, but I honestly feel so very lucky he was already on his way back home. I lived at that condo for another 1.5 years and never saw that man again. But please, Lord, let us never meet. Creepy Alley Rape Man. I live in a fairly small town of 800 people in the middle of Missouri. Pretty much everybody knows everybody. But sometimes there's an odd fellow here or there. One night my cousin and I, who were both 12-year-old girls, decided to go for a walk. Usually this isn't a problem because it is a small town, with pretty much 0% crime rate. We decided to take a back alley shortcut on the way back to our house that night that we'd never really taken. As we were halfway down, this large, 400-pound man stepped in the middle of the alley. He was about 40 years old and was balding, and still had really long, stringy hair that you could fry chicken in. He was so heavy that he had raspy breathing. There was one street light, but it was further down and didn't completely cover our area. The man stepped in front of us and introduced himself as Pat, then asked to shake our hands. We politely refused and knew stranger danger, so we excused ourselves and started to walk past him. He stepped back in our path again and started talking about how he just redid his apartment and he made chili for dinner and really wanted us to come in and see it. We tried to get away several times, and each time he stepped back in our path and wouldn't let us past. We eventually turned around and ran the other way, and we never saw him again after that. It was the closest encounter to a pedophile creep rapist that I ever came, though. The time I was almost someone's gang initiation. This is my other let's not meet situation, which occurred when my son was 4 years old. This time I am 100% sure that my kid prevented something horrible from happening to me. It turned into an episode of Law and Order with a terrifying ending. By way of background, I live in Milwaukee, which has the honor of being the most racially segregated city in the country. It's a cool city overall, but we have a really shitty inner city with a ton of poverty and violence and gang activity. At the time this happened, I was living in a sort of in-between area, not the ghetto, but not a super nice area either. I was a 22-year-old single mother. I lived in a ground floor apartment on one of the main streets. I parked in the back alley behind the building. My front door faced the street and I had a side door too, with a walk running between my building and the one next door. Anyways, I got home in the middle of the afternoon on a Saturday with my kid. As we drove down the alley to get to my parking spot, I saw a guy in a hoodie sort of lurking around by my parking spot. It was weird because it was warm outside, and he had his hood up. But there were a bunch of gangsters wannabe kids in the neighborhood, so whatever. It was definitely an odd place to just be standing, though. As I got close to the building and started pulling into my parking spot, he turned around and started walking towards the street, past my side door. He definitely left because I arrived. I figured he was smoking a blunt or something like that. I didn't think anything of it. Then I got my son and some bags out of the car. I went the same way the guy had just taken to my side door. I didn't see him at all. My son and I went inside, and I was in the process of putting stuff down when I heard my doorbell ring. I wasn't expecting anyone, and I immediately thought it was this guy. Being young and naive, I answered the front door. It was the same guy, still with his hood up. He immediately smiled at me, but not in a friendly way, more of a leer. He looked to be about 16 years old, with a fake gold grill that was stubbed with little fake diamonds. I regretted opening the door, but here I was, so I went with it. Hi. He kept staring at me and said nothing. At this point, I saw another kid in a hoodie pacing behind him on the sidewalk and looking at us. I was quickly realizing that this was not a good situation. My son, who I had momentarily forgot about, came up behind me. He did the shy kid thing where he stood behind me and poked his head out from behind my butt to look at the guy. Hoodie dude looked at him for a good couple seconds and then back at me. Yo, is Danielle around? I know who that is. Maybe try the other door. I gestured to my neighbor's door to my left. You sure? Yeah, sorry. And he left, walking in the opposite direction of my neighbor's door. Hoodie dude number 2 followed him. I thought it was really weird that they didn't even try to check next door for Danielle. I thought the whole thing was really weird. My boyfriend got to my apartment a few minutes later, and I was glad to see him. He had a really old Jeep that he always parked out front on the main streets. When he went out to get something from his car shortly after he arrived, it was gone. Fuck. Car theft was a common thing in this neighborhood, but stealing it from the main street in broad daylight was pretty ballsy, so he called the cops, filed a report, the whole nine. I told the cop about Hoodie Dude since it seemed like it could be important. I was able to give a good description of the guy who came to my door asking for Danielle. I have no idea if it was relevant, but the fact that the Jeep was stolen shortly after these guys were around seemed pretty relevant. That's where the story ended till 2 days later. I got a call from a different cop in the downtown area. He told me he found the Jeep and, other than the ignition, it wasn't damaged. Yay. He asked if we could come downtown and to do a lineup, see if I could identify the people who had knocked on my door right before the Jeep got taken. That was weird. A lineup for a stolen car, but I agreed. He asked if I could come down in a couple days. Also weird. They wouldn't want me to do it right away, but I was mostly focused on the fact that doing a lineup was pretty fucking cool. So I went to the downtown area a couple days later. The way this went seemed kind of unorthodox, but it was what it was. 2 detectives took me into a dark room where a woman in her 50s was sitting with a young woman in a wheelchair. The young woman's lower leg was in a giant cast with this whole metal contraption surrounding it, with maybe a dozen metal rods going into the cast itself. At this point, I had no idea what was happening. The detectives instructed us that we weren't to say anything during the lineup, except if we wanted the guys to turn around again or whatever, and that we couldn't talk to each other at all. Okay, we ended up having to wait in the room for almost an hour in the dark, awkwardly, not speaking. They explained it was taking more time than anticipated to get 12 guys from the jail over to the area. Finally, we got started. They did 2 lineups and gave us forms to mark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. There was a large window in front of us, and they explained that the guys couldn't see us. They turned the lights on in the room behind that window and brought each guy in individually. I couldn't identify anyone in the first lineup. I felt sort of bad, actually, but I couldn't. Second lineup started, and I didn't recognize guys 1, 2, or 3. Number 4 came out, though, and I immediately recognized the dude who had knocked on my door. He didn't have his stupid grill anymore, but it was definitely the same guy. After the second lineup was done, they brought the 2 other women into the hallway and told me to stay put. After a few minutes, they came back to me. Detectives asked if I recognized anyone, and I told them I was sure about number 4 in the second lineup, but couldn't identify anyone in the first lineup. I gathered by this point that Hoodie Dude number 2 had likely been in the first lineup, but I hadn't gotten a good look at him when I saw him the first time. They had me sign 2 forms, one for each lineup, with the second form identifying number 4 as Hoodie Dude number 1. When I gave the forms back, the detectives told me that they could tell what was actually going on now that the lineup was done. Good, because I was confused as fuck at this point. He explained that number 4 was indeed one of the guys they arrested with my boyfriend's Jeep. The guys had stolen the Jeep and driven to a nearby part of town, into a quiet and lily-white neighborhood. They came across a young couple unloading groceries from their car. The young woman with the leg contraption was the female half of that couple. They parked the stolen Jeep behind the couple, got out, and immediately shot them both. They shot the woman in the leg and shot the young man in the dick. He was still in the hospital in bad condition, which was why he wasn't there. The older woman was the girl's mom and had brought her from the hospital to do the lineup. The reason it was delayed a couple of days was because she had emergency surgery to try and fix the damage to her leg. The guys didn't demand anything from the couple or take anything from them after the shooting. They just immediately shot them. The young woman managed to remember the license plate number of the Jeep, and they were apprehended in a corner store when a cop saw the stolen car parked outside shortly after the shooting. The shooters were both teenagers, but were both charged as adults. One of them had stupidly talked a bit before lowering up, and I told the detective that it was a gang initiation. They had to shoot a white person. That was the price of admission. They had stolen my boyfriend's car after taking the bus out to the street I lived on. They had figured it would be easier to get away if they had wheels. The detectives were pretty sure I had been the original target of opportunity, but couldn't explain why they hadn't gone through with it. Nerves, maybe. I knew why. It was because he saw my kid peeking out from behind me. They told me I might have to testify if the case went to court, and told me I'd hear from the DA's office when they had needed me. A couple months later, one of the detectives called me and told me that Hoodie Dudes pled out to attempted murder charges in exchange for reduced time. The guy who got shot in the dick survived. I asked for how many years, but I assumed they're probably still in prison 13 years later. As an ironic postscript to the story, my boyfriend had the same Jeep stolen from the same spot in front of my apartment about 4 months later, also in broad daylight. That time, they didn't find it right away. He was staying over at my house weeks later when he got a call around 2 a.m. from the MPD arson units. They torched it and left it in the middle of the streets in a notoriously violent area of the city. I moved after that.